So Prince William just caught Queen Camilla's daughter, trying to quietly auction off Princess Diana's personal jewellery through a civilian catalogue. And the absolute second the paperwork surfaced, he pulled the trigger on a legal assault that literally froze her accounts and cornered the king in his own private study. And honestly, the reason this whole thing blew up behind closed doors isn't just about stolen diamonds. It's about 26 years of broken promises finally hitting a wall. Before we break down every single piece of this paper, hit subscribe real quick, so you never miss our deep dives into what the palace is actually doing behind the scenes. All right, let's start where the story actually begins. So it all started at exactly 9:15 on a Tuesday morning, inside the private administrative offices at Kensington Palace. A senior archivist was going through what was supposed to be a routine digital correspondence folder from Sotheby's auction house in London. This wasn't flagged as an urgent file. It didn't have any warning markers on it. It was just a standard high-resolution appraisal ledger sent over for routine cross-referencing. But when the staff member scrolled down to the third page, two catalogue photography images popped up on the screen that made the entire room go dead silent. The first image was a black diamond pendant suspended on a delicate platinum chain. The second was a sapphire-lined bracelet constructed with an intricate geometric setting that was unmistakably custom-made. Both pieces were laid flat against a neutral grey studio background, prepared for a private off-market valuation. And both pieces were logged in the official consignment entry under a civilian name, Laura Lopes. Now, if you don't know who Laura Lopes is, she is Queen Camilla's daughter. And the consignment filing listed these items strictly as private family heirlooms with absolutely zero royal provenance attached to them. To anyone at Sotheby's who didn't know the deep history of royal vaults, it looked like a standard private appraisal for a wealthy civilian client. But the archivist at Kensington Palace recognised them immediately. Not because they had seen them on a display shelf recently, but because those exact two pieces existed in confidential photo archives dating all the way back to the summer of 1997, worn publicly by Princess Diana just weeks before she died. And here's the part that actually gets crazy. These items were never supposed to appear in a civilian catalogue. They weren't listed on any public crown registry, and they hadn't been seen by anyone in William's household for more than 2 decades. The archivist didn't send a polite email back to Sotheby's. They didn't leave a message with Clarence House. They picked up an internal phone line and called Prince William's personal private secretary directly. Within less than 60 minutes, the digital catalogue pages were printed out and placed directly on Prince William's desk. People who were in the building that morning described a very specific shift in the atmosphere. There were no raised voices. Nobody was slamming doors or throwing papers around. It was just this cold, heavy stillness that happens inside palace halls, right before a massive institutional move takes place. When William sat down and looked at those catalogue photographs, he didn't pick up the phone to call his father. He didn't ask for a diplomatic explanation from Camilla. And he definitely didn't request an informal family meeting over afternoon tea to ask how those diamonds ended up in her daughter's hands. Instead, William picked up his phone and made one single call to Sir Julian Martin, the senior managing partner at Farrer & Company. That is the elite legal firm that handles the absolute most sensitive private matters for the British Crown. And honestly, when you look at how that conversation went down, it wasn't an exploratory chat asking for advice. It was purely operational. William gave his legal team a direct instruction: verify the consignment trail, confirm the civilian title registration, and prepare an immediate legal blockade. What Camilla's extended family had treated as a quiet private appraisal was in plain legal terms an attempt to launder royal provenance away from the direct line of succession by placing those pieces into a civilian auction house under a private name. Laura Lopes was one step away from creating a paper trail that would declare those heirlooms private property forever. And the second those items cleared a private sale, recovering them through any court in the world would become practically impossible. William understood that completely. His lawyers understood it too. And in those quiet morning hours, everyone inside Kensington Palace realised that this was not a simple misunderstanding or a careless mistake. This was a deliberate scheme, and it had come within 24 hours of working. But what Camilla's household didn't realise was that William wasn't just reacting to a photo from Sotheby's. He had already spent the previous 18 months quietly setting up a massive financial trap, and this discovery was the exact trigger he needed to spring it. Now, to really understand why this discovery sent absolute shockwaves through the royal family, you have to understand how title laundering works inside private royal vaults. Most people assume that every piece of jewellery, every painting, and every historical artefact inside a royal residence is catalogued on a central government computer somewhere. But that is completely wrong. The British royal estate operates across three entirely different categories: official, crown assets, private sovereign property, and what insiders call uncatalogued family repositories. When an item sits inside an uncatalogued family repository for over 2 decades without modern digital paperwork, its legal status becomes remarkably soft. It sits in an administrative shadow. And if someone with physical access to those rooms quietly moves an item out, holds onto it for a few years, and then presents it to a private auction house under a civilian name, something sinister happens to the history. The auction house creates a new catalogue entry. That entry lists the civilian as the legal owner. Once that item is sold to a private collector, behind non-disclosure agreements, the original royal provenance is effectively erased. The history is cleaned, the title is legalised, and the royal family loses any legal right to ever demand its return. That was the exact mechanism Laura Lopes was using. And honestly, when you look at what was at stake, we are not talking about a couple of sentimental trinkets here. We are talking about millions of pounds worth of historical assets tied directly to Princess Diana's personal legacy. If that catalogue entry had gone live to international buyers, those diamonds would have disappeared into a private vault in Switzerland or New York, and nobody in the direct line of succession could have ever touched them again. But here is what makes this even more significant. William had already anticipated that Camilla's circle was operating in these exact grey areas. Months before the Sotheby's file ever hit his desk, William made a massive quiet move that shook the entire financial infrastructure of the royal estates. In his capacity as the Duke of Cornwall, William executed a sudden liquidation of 20% of the Duchy of Cornwall's commercial real estate portfolio. We are talking about pulling roughly £500 million out of active property markets in a single coordinated movement. On paper, the official press release talked about local housing investments and green community initiatives. It sounded responsible, generous, and completely unthreatening to the public. But inside the financial offices at Clarence House, the reaction was pure panic. For over 20 years, a network of private discretionary funds and civilian-adjacent trusts had been quietly routing profits from those exact duchy estates toward Camilla's extended circle. It was an informal arrangement that had been allowed to run during Charles's time as Duke, providing quiet financial padding for people who didn't officially hold royal roles. William didn't ask for an audit. He didn't give them a 6-month warning. He pulled the funding overnight and liquidated the underlying assets, effectively shutting down those financial pipelines permanently. His own financial advisors actually warned him against it at the time. They told him directly that doing this would be seen as an open declaration of war by the king's household and Camilla's team. They told him it would ruin personal relationships that the palace had spent decades trying to manage. But William's response was completely direct. He basically told them that the duchy resources existed to serve the institution and the public, not to provide private income for people operating in the margins of the royal family. So when that Sotheby's catalogue photo arrived weeks later, William wasn't starting from scratch. He had already dismantled their financial support system. Now he was looking at concrete proof that Camilla's circle was trying to convert physical heirlooms into private cash to make up for the funds he had just cut off. The stakes weren't just financial anymore, they were constitutional. But to truly understand why the sight of those specific jewels hit William with such cold, terrifying clarity, you have to go back to a conversation that took place 26 years ago, involving a grieving teenage boy who was told something he was never meant to remember. To really get why William acted with such absolute ruthlessness, we have to rewind all the way back to the summer of the year 2000. William was just 17 years old at the time. He was a teenager carrying a very particular kind of grief, trying to process the loss of his mother 3 years after the Paris crash, while living inside an institution that just wanted everyone to move on and pretend everything was fine. During a stay at Highgrove House that summer, William happened to come across a set of private family photo albums from the mid-1990s. In those photographs, Diana was wearing the black diamond pendant and the sapphire line bracelet. These weren't formal crown jewels handed out for state dinners. These were personal pieces that carried specific intimate memories for a boy who had watched his mother wear them at home. William went to senior palace administrators and asked a very simple question: where are my mother's personal jewels stored? And when will they be catalogued for her sons? The answer he got was delivered with that soft, patronising gentleness that courtiers always use when they are trying to manage a child. He was told that the items had been placed in secure family storage. He was told that they were being looked after by the right people in the right place. He was basically told, don't worry about it, William. Everything is being taken care of. Except it wasn't. What actually happened was that those pieces were moved into a locked, uncatalogued repository at Highgrove House. They weren't registered on the official inventory of Princess Diana's estate. They weren't logged in the official central registry that governs royal property. They were placed into a deliberate administrative shadow. They sat in a grey room off the books, completely untraceable through standard institutional channels. For 26 years, those items stayed in the dark. They were never worn in public. They were never displayed at exhibitions. They were never included in any official accounting presented to William or Harry. The courtiers counted on the fact that a 17-year-old boy would eventually grow up, get busy with his university years, join the military, start a family, and simply forget that those specific pieces ever existed. And honestly, when you think about what that actually means, it turns your stomach. That wasn't an administrative oversight. That was a deliberate choice to keep precious, personal history hidden until the people holding the keys thought enough time had passed to quietly liquidate them. They waited until they thought William was too distracted by his own public duties to notice an off-market catalogue entry in London. When the photograph from Sotheby's arrived on William's desk 26 years later, it didn't come as a surprise. It came as a cold, clarifying realization. It was the moment where every suspicion he had harboured as a teenager suddenly turned into concrete proof. He realised that the adults who had patted him on the shoulder at 17 and told him not to worry had been keeping those pieces in the dark, so that one day Camilla's daughter could walk into an auction house and claim them as civilian inheritance. I was no longer a grieving teenager in a hallway at Highgrove. He was now the Prince of Wales, the heir apparent to the British throne, and the master of his own legal apparatus. There was no courtier in the building with the power to tell him to calm down or wait for a better time. And what William did next was so calculated, so direct, and so constitutional that it left King Charles with absolutely no room to protect his wife's family. Now let's break down the exact scheme that Laura Lopes and her team of private advisors had put together. Because when you look at the mechanics of it, it was staggering in its ambition. And honestly, it came dangerously close to working. Back in the early months of the year, Laura Lopes began working with a small group of independent art consultants and high-end private jewellers based in Mayfair. The objective was to prepare two key assets for what is known in the trade as a private treaty sale. A private treaty sale is completely different from a noisy public auction. There are no cameras, there are no published catalogues handed out to the press, and there are no live video streams of people bidding. An auction house simply acts as a confidential broker, matching an anonymous seller with an anonymous ultra-high net worth buyer behind closed doors. The combined appraisal value set for the black diamond pendant and the sapphire bracelet was £3.5 million. To ensure the sale went through without triggering automatic flags, the advisors submitted the items under a civilian consignment profile. They used a private holding account that listed Laura Lopes not by any royal title or court connection, but simply as a private citizen possessing vintage jewellery inherited through private family lines. The auction house was instructed to complete the provenance verification by May 21st. Once that date passed, the consignment agreement would become legally binding. The private treaty catalogue would be shown to prospective international buyers and non-disclosure agreements would be signed. Once an NDA is signed, in a private treaty, sale extracting information about the buyer or stopping the transfer of the assets requires a massive international court battle that can take years and cost millions of pounds. And ask yourself this: why did they pick that specific window of time to move those pieces? Because the timing was calculated with total precision. King Charles was undergoing active medical treatments, creating huge amounts of administrative distraction at Buckingham Palace and Clarence House. William was managing an immense workload, balancing his public engagements with supporting Catherine through her own health recovery. Camilla's circle calculated that the senior royals were so overwhelmed with personal and institutional pressure that nobody would be checking consignment ledgers at Sotheby's. They assumed the administrative friction between households would give them just enough cover to get past the May 21st deadline. They believed William was looking the other way. They believed that even if someone noticed later on, the palace would be forced to keep quiet to avoid a massive public scandal during a delicate political moment for the monarchy. They relied on the idea that the royal family always chooses silence over confrontation. That was their fatal mistake. They mistook William's silence over the years for ignorance. They thought because he hadn't brought up those missing pieces from the year 2000, he didn't know they existed. But William hadn't forgotten a single detail. He had simply been waiting for them to make a definitive move that would give him absolute legal leverage. The moment Laura Lopes submitted those pieces under her civilian name, she gave William the exact legal weapon he needed. It was no longer a vague family dispute over who owned what in an old house. It was now a documented case of civilian conversion of Crown-adjacent assets. And on the morning of May 20th, just 24 hours before the Sotheby's deadline was set to lock the sale in place, William got into his car and drove straight to Sandringham. He didn't bring a team of courtiers. He brought a single black binder. When Prince William arrived at Sandringham House, he didn't ask for a formal reception. He walked into his father's private study, closed the door behind him, and placed that black leather binder directly on the desk in front of King Charles. Staff members, who were working in the adjoining corridors that afternoon, reported that the house was eerie in its quietness. There were no raised voices heard through the heavy wooden doors. No shouting matches, just a low, continuous tone of absolute seriousness. Inside that binder was a legal framework drafted by Sir Julian Martin at Farrer & Company. It contained a specific draft document known as a letters patent for asset reclassification grounded in emergency succession statutes. Now let me translate what that actually means in plain English, because this is where the story stops being a family feud and turns into a constitutional showdown. The document stated that if the reigning monarch is unable or unwilling to protect historical crown assets from unauthorised civilian liquidation due to personal conflict or compromised executive oversight, the heir apparent holds the constitutional standing to petition the Privy Council directly for protective guardianship over those specific estates. In plain words, William looked his father in the eyes and handed him an ultimatum. He basically told Charles, "You either sign this decree right now, officially reclassifying those jewels as Crown direct line assets protected for my heirs, or I walk this document into the Privy Council tomorrow morning and trigger a constitutional review of your estate authority." Think about the sheer weight of that moment for a second. That wasn't a son throwing a temper tantrum. That was a future king laying out a bulletproof legal trap for the current king. If Charles refused to sign, William would take the matter to the Privy Council, exposing the fact that Camilla's daughter was trying to sell Diana's diamonds with the implicit protection of Clarence House. It would have triggered a public and institutional nightmare that Charles could not possibly survive politically. William laid out two options on that desk. Option 1. Charles signs the executive decree immediately stripping Camilla's household of any legal authority over those items and authorising full High Court enforcement against the auction house. Option 2. William goes public through official legal channels, initiates the Privy Council petition, and lets the entire world see exactly what Camilla's family had been up to behind closed doors. Charles sat in that study, looking at the document, surrounded by his own legal advisors who had been called into the room. And those advisors gave the king a brutally honest assessment. William's legal position was airtight, the paper trail was flawless, the draft letters patent was constitutionally sound. There was no diplomatic middle ground available, there was no offer to negotiate a compromise. What passed between father and son in those final silent minutes has never been officially published in any court circular. But the result was immediate. King Charles picked up his pen and signed the executive decree. With that single signature, the legal status of those jewels was permanently transformed. They were formally reclassified as Crown property designated exclusively for the direct line of succession, meaning Prince William, Princess Catherine and their children. Camilla's household was completely stripped of any legal claim, standing or access. Charles walked out of that study, still holding the title of king. But everyone in that room knew that something fundamental had shifted in the power dynamic of the royal family. William had proven that, when the institution's core legacy was threatened, he was fully prepared to exercise real constitutional authority. And the absolute second that signature was dry, William unleashed the full force of the British legal system against law elopes. At 8 o'clock on the morning of May 23rd, while most of London was commuting to work, senior partners from Farrer & Company walked into the High Court of Justice in London. They weren't there to file a polite civil inquiry. They were there to execute an emergency application for a Mareva injunction. Now for those who don't spend their time reading legal journals. A Mareva injunction is basically the nuclear option of British civil law. It is an extraordinary freezing order that doesn't issue warnings or ask for meetings. The very second a judge signs a Mareva order, every single financial asset tied to the target individual is instantly locked. By 9:30 that morning, the order was served on Coutts Barclays and every major private wealth firm handling accounts under the name of Laura Lopes. Her bank accounts were frozen. Her investment portfolios were locked. Her private discretionary trust accounts were completely shut down. She couldn't move money. She couldn't transfer funds overseas. She couldn't liquidate stocks. And she couldn't even use a credit card. She was legally paralysed within hours. And William didn't stop there. At 5:30 in the morning on May 24th, before the sun was even fully up, High Court enforcement officers, accompanied by legal representatives from Kensington Palace, arrived at Laura Lopes's private country estate in Wiltshire. They weren't there for a polite conversation over tea. They arrived with a ministerial-level search and recovery warrant signed by a High Court judge. The enforcement team entered the property under formal legal protocol. They executed a precise, systematic inspection of the private safes on the premises. Within 2 hours, the black diamond pendant and the sapphire line bracelet were located, photographed under judicial chain of custody rules, placed into secure lockboxes, and officially seized as Crown-adjacent property that had been wrongfully converted for private sale. Camilla's personal legal representatives tried to intervene while the raid was happening. They called senior lawyers in London, frantically attempting to claim sovereign immunity. They argued that as the daughter of the Queen Consort, Laura Lopes was protected from this kind of aggressive judicial enforcement under royal prerogative protections. But William's legal team had already closed that door before the raid even started. They presented a formal legal brief showing that sovereign immunity under British constitutional law applies strictly to the reigning monarch, and in very specific official contexts, the Queen Consort herself. It does not extend to adult civilian children living in private residences attempting to sell uncatalogued historical items. Under the law, Laura Lopes was treated exactly like any other civilian in possession of contested property. By 12 o'clock noon on May 24th, the 2 pieces of jewellery were sitting inside a high-security vault at Kensington Palace, fully logged, fully photographed, and placed under the direct physical custody of William's private security detail. Laura Lopes was left with frozen bank accounts, a seized estate vault, and a legal paper trail that threatened total financial ruin if she attempted to challenge the order in open court. Camilla's team had spent 20 years mastering the subtle art of palace politics, soft influence, and quiet manoeuvring. But faced with an aggressive, high-speed legal execution executed through the High Court, their political influence was completely useless. The recovery was total, the legal victory was absolute. But William knew that taking the jewellery back in secret wasn't enough. He needed to deliver one final public signal to the entire world that would make sure Camilla's circle never attempted anything like this ever again. A few weeks after the seizure in Wiltshire, the royal calendar called for a major evening gala at the Royal Academy of Arts in London. This was one of those high-visibility red carpet events, attended by senior royals, international diplomats, high society figures, and dozens of photographers lined up outside the entrance. Queen Camilla arrived first, wearing a formal evening gown, projecting absolute composure for the waiting cameras. She smiled, waved to the crowds, and walked the carpet with the exact kind of practiced poise she had used for over 2 decades to navigate public scrutiny. To the casual observer watching the evening news, it looked like business as usual inside the royal family. Then Prince William and Princess Catherine arrived. As Catherine stepped out of the car and walked into the grand foyer under the bright lights of the press gallery, every camera in the room shifted toward her. She looked stunning as always, but it wasn't her dress that made every senior royal reporter in the room freeze. It was what she was wearing on her right wrist. Positioned with total quiet, deliberateness was a vintage diamond and sapphire bracelet from Princess Diana's private historical collection. Not the seized bracelet from Wiltshire, that piece was safely locked in an archive vault, but a fully documented, indisputable sister piece from Diana's personal inheritance archive. A piece that belonged without a single shred of legal ambiguity to the direct line of succession. Catherine didn't make a speech about it. Kensington Palace didn't issue a press release explaining the jewellery choice. No communications officer pointed it out to the reporters behind the velvet ropes. It was simply there, visible to everyone, explained to no one, and completely unmistakable to anyone who understood what had just happened behind closed doors over the previous 3 weeks. The symbolic message was devastatingly clear. As Catherine walked through the gallery room, passing within a few feet of Queen Camilla, the visual contrast told the entire story of the monarchy's future. Diana's legacy was not lost. It was not for sale in an off-market catalogue. It was not sitting in a civilian safe in Wiltshire. It was right where it belonged, being worn publicly, proudly, and with absolute authority by the future Queen of England. Reporters who were standing inside the main reception hall described the subtle energy shift between the 2 women. Camilla kept her composure. She is far too experienced in palace life to break character in front of flashing cameras, but the distance between them was palpable. It wasn't an open argument. It was something far colder and much more permanent. It was the visual confirmation that a line had been drawn down the middle of the institution, and William's side of that line held all the power. The photographs from that night swept across international newspapers within hours. Royal commentators talked about Catherine's elegant style choice and the touching tribute to her late mother-in-law. But inside the private quarters of Clarence House, those images were read as a complete and total surrender demand. William had not only recovered the stolen items through the High Court, he had staged a masterclass in visual diplomacy that permanently reclaimed his mother's memory from the shadow of Camilla's household. The public message was complete. But behind the scenes, the forensic accountants auditing the Highgrove vault were about to drop a second bombshell that turned this local family victory into an international crisis. While the public was still reacting to Catherine's appearance at the gala, the internal support system that Camilla had spent 20 years building inside the palace was completely falling apart. The first thing William did after the Wiltshire raid was place a total operational lockdown on the Buckingham Palace press office. For 2 decades, Camilla's team had relied on a very specific strategy when things got tense, behind closed doors. They would arrange quiet, off-the-record lunches with senior tabloid editors. They would offer subtle leaks about other family members in exchange for favourable coverage that protected Camilla and her children. William shut that system down overnight. He issued a strict institutional directive stating that any palace staff member or communications officer caught providing background briefings or off-the-record comments regarding the estate dispute would face immediate termination and potential prosecution under non-disclosure contracts. For the first time in 20 years, Camilla found herself completely cut off from her favourite press outlets. She couldn't leak, she couldn't spin the story, and she couldn't use friendly columnists to shift the blame onto someone else. Meanwhile, Laura Lopes was facing complete financial paralysis. The Mareva injunction was still in full effect, locking her bank accounts and private trusts. Her legal team went to Farrer and Company to ask for terms to lift the freeze. The conditions William laid out were brutal. On June 14th, Laura Lopes signed a formal binding legal surrender agreement. Under the terms of that document, she officially relinquished any and all present or future claims to the recovered black diamond, pendant, the sapphire bracelet, and any other items originating from the Highgrove repository. In exchange, William's legal team agreed to lift the general freezing order on her personal bank accounts, allowing her to pay her legal fees and return to private life, but with one massive clause attached an ironclad confidentiality agreement that carried massive financial penalties if she ever spoke about the transaction to the media or third parties. Laura signed the papers. She had no choice. The alternative was a public High Court trial that would have exposed her entire financial history to the international media and permanently ruined her mother's public standing. Inside Clarence House, the mood was described by courtiers as one of absolute exhaustion. Camilla had spent 2 decades transforming her image from the most criticised woman in Britain to Queen Consort. She had carefully navigated the press, built relationships with political figures, and secured positions for her family within the fringes of royal life. And in less than 30 days, William had systematically dismantled every piece of leverage she possessed. Her daughter had been forced to sign a legal surrender. Her press contacts had been silenced. Her access to discretionary estate funding had been cut off through the duchy restructuring. And the king had been forced to sign an executive decree that officially recognised William's authority to intervene in estate management. It was a complete and total institutional collapse. What Camilla's circle had spent 20 years building through soft influence was wiped out in 4 weeks through sheer legal precision. It looked like the story was finally over. William had won every single battle. But as the High Court auditors finished cross-referencing the physical items from the Highgrove repository with the original inventories from the year 2000, they realised something terrifying. To ensure that a scandal like this could never happen again, Prince William executed his final administrative move. He officially established and registered the Diana Heritage Trust. This wasn't just a basic trust fund. It was an ironclad legal structure designed by top constitutional experts. Under its terms, every single piece of jewellery, personal artefact, letter and private asset belonging to Princess Diana that was currently in or recovered by the Crown was placed under the exclusive guardianship of the trust. The trustees were appointed directly by William, and the sole future beneficiaries were designated as Catherine, Princess of Wales, and in time Princess Charlotte. No other royal household, no extended family member, and no civilian relative, including anyone from Camilla's line, could ever request access loan authority or private appraisal rights over those assets ever again. It was a total legal fortress built around Diana's physical legacy. Dependencies were locked, papers were filed, and William had secured everything within his reach. But then came the leak that nobody saw coming. A confidential annex attached to the Ministry of Justice review was quietly leaked to senior financial journalists. And when you look at the numbers inside that file, it makes your jaw drop. According to the original unredacted, Highgrove Repository inventory, logged in the summer of the year 2000. That locked room had contained 14 distinct, documented personal items belonging to Princess Diana. William had recovered 2. That meant 12 historical items were still completely missing. The forensic accounting team traced the paper trail backward through digital transfer logs and private storage receipts. And what they uncovered was far bigger than a local consignment at Sotheby's in London. The remaining 12 pieces had not been kept in Wiltshire. They had been systematically moved out of the country years earlier, through a complex series of private international art transfers. Where did those 12 pieces end up? They were traced directly to an anonymous corporate holding company registered in the state of Delaware, right here in the United States. Delaware is famous worldwide for its ultra-strict corporate secrecy laws, meaning the true beneficial owners of corporate entities registered. They are completely shielded from public registers and foreign court warrants. And buried inside that leaked Ministry of Justice file was a single internal code name used by the advisors who arranged the overseas transfer, the Montecito connection. Let that sink in for a second. While William was battling Camilla's family in London to recover the 2 items left behind at Sotheby's 12, invaluable pieces of Diana's personal legacy had already been shifted across the Atlantic, sitting inside an offshore corporate sanctuary tied directly to the region where Prince Harry and Meghan Markle set up their post-royal operations. The realization hit Kensington Palace like a physical blow. William had won the domestic war against Camilla. He had cornered his father Frozen Laura's accounts and locked down the remaining crown inventory through the Diana Heritage Trust. But 12 pieces of his mother's history were sitting in a corporate vault 3,000 miles away, beyond the reach of the High Court in London, held by someone who understood exactly how to use offshore corporate structures to stay untouchable. William had secured the future of the crown inside Britain, but the battle for his mother's legacy was no longer just a palace secret. It had crossed an ocean. When you step back and look at the entire chain of events from that 9:15 morning check at Sotheby's to the High Court raids in Wiltshire and the offshore paper trail in Delaware, you realise that we didn't just witness a family argument over a jewellery box. We witnessed the official, irreversible beginning of Prince William's reign. For years, the public narrative around the British monarchy was that King Charles would serve as a bridge between the old Elizabethan era and the modern world, managing family tensions, with soft compromises and keeping everyone happy behind closed doors. But what this crisis proved beyond any doubt is that the compromise era is officially over. Charles walked out of that study at Sandringham, still carrying the title of king. But the entire institution now knows that when real constitutional pressure is applied, it is William who holds the legal leverage, the willingness to act, and the absolute support of the Crown's legal apparatus. He didn't wait for permission. He didn't ask for a family committee. He saw a threat to the institution's core integrity, and he used every legal weapon available under British law to eliminate it. And think about what this means for the legacy of Princess Diana. For nearly 30 years, the story of Diana was framed as a tragedy, about a woman who was brought into a cold institution, stripped of her royal standing, and gradually erased by the palace establishment, while the people who enabled her husband's affair moved into the grandest rooms in the estate. But William's counterattack flipped that dynamic forever. By creating the Diana Heritage Trust and enforcing strict legal boundaries around her memory, William used the very same institutional legal power that once marginalised his mother to secure her place at the absolute centre of the monarchy's future. Camilla's circle built their strategy on the assumption that William was still that 17-year-old boy in the hallway at Highgrove, who could be told to look the other way. They learned the hard way that the boy who walked behind his mother's coffin is now a ruthless, hyper-focused strategist who will stop at nothing to protect her memory and his children's inheritance. Camilla remains queen consort. She will continue to carry out her duties beside King Charles with the composure she has spent a lifetime perfecting. But the private influence her extended family once enjoyed inside the palace has been completely wiped out. The grey area funds are gone, the uncatalogued vaults are locked, the PR channels are silenced, and the legal lines have been drawn in stone. Yet as quiet returns to the hallways of Kensington Palace, those 12 missing items sitting in Delaware remain an open wound that no High Court order in London can heal. They serve as a constant lingering reminder that while William can control the monarchy inside Britain, the fractures created within his family over the last 30 years are far from over. The story of the royal family isn't a fairy tale about gilded carriages and quiet tradition. It is a brutal high-stakes game of legal strategy, power dynamics, and historical survival. William played his hand with total perfection, recovering what he could reach and building a fortress around the future. The 2 pieces came home, the 12 did not. And somewhere in the silence between those 2 facts lives a reckoning. the monarchy will spend the next generation trying to survive.